we've seen God's call for Abraham in this test of his faith to be willing to offer up as a burnt offering his own son, his special son, Isaac. And now in part 2, beginning in verse 3 and following, Abraham exercises his faithfulness. Again, as we've seen, this connection between, as we talked about in the introduction to this section, the parallels between God's call to Abraham in the beginning to depart from the world of norms of Mesopotamia, from Ur of the Chaldees to Haran, the homeland of their forefathers, to now go to this land of promise, through whom the divine call will be brought forth, and the promises brought to fruition, the promises fulfilled, and now the test of that faithfulness is brought to its peak. But Abraham, beginning in verse 3, complies with God's instruction. It would be this through which, of course, God's plan from the original call to be a blessing through the nations, through his descendants that would come through this promised son and his descendants, that all of the climax of the divine covenant promises would be fulfilled. But here we see in verse 3, Abraham follows God's instructions. So the first, Vayashkem, again, another hifil is that what does he do? He gets it all together early in the morning, and he then, packs up the donkey, his hamor, his donkey, and now again another, and he took. Again, he was instructed to take Isaac. Now he is going to be accompanied on this journey. And again, these two young men, the Na'arav, as they are described, Shnei Na'arav, are simply observers of the scene, and who, and of course, could become, as in the history of law, they're two witnesses to the acts that will take place. So these two young men act as witnesses who accompany them on this journey to this land of Moriah, in which Abraham is to follow God's instruction. So we are told that Abraham then took. So he gets ready, he prepares, he then takes, using that same terminology of lakak, and now simply kal vayikto form, a imperfect plus vav consecutive, along with Isaac his son. And what did he do? He bound the wood of the offering, yivak'ah, there a PL form, as this particular verb is often used in the PL. And then further instruction. So one of the things that you go through this passage, the number of times that these vayiktol forms are utilized, and you really look at the overall outlay of the narrative in this Hebrew layout, the actions happen quickly, so that he quickly prepares, packs up the donkey, takes Isaac, the two young men and his son, and he binds up the wood of the burnt offering. And then he rose up and went to the place that God would show him. So in rapid succession in this verse 3, Abraham is quickly, dutifully, faithfully following God's instruction to prepare and go to this mountain where God. So again, paralleled in this, he's going to a place, a mountain that God would show him, just as he went originally to the land of Canaan, to this land that God would show him and reveal himself. So we have the instruction to go to a place that he would be shown, and that God would, again, the use of the term ra'ah, to see, both in the verb and in the participial forms, are used in both narratives of the early chapters of the patriarchs in 11 to 12, and then also here in chapter 22. In verse 4, we learned that, however, as the narrative begins to slow down, again, verse 3 is all the preparation, and they set on the journey. Now we learn that this journey from where they're staying down in the southern part of the land, in the region of Beersheba, that it will take 3 days to get to the place that God would show him. So we see that on day 3, or in the day the 3rd, this is the way you say it in Hebrew, Bayom Hashlishi, that Abraham, by Yisah, lifted up his eyes and saw. So he's obviously on this journey. 3 days into this journey, again, God promises that he would show him. Now he sees in this revelatory experience the place that God would show him. And so one of the things I mentioned earlier in the semester, but a reminder here, that the verb ra'ah, there are a couple of different words for seeing in the Old Testament. But ra'ah is often used in, we might say, seeing with divine perspective, or seeing with insight the events that are happening. So you're not just a simple, uninvolved observer of the situation, but as he approaches on this 3rd day the mountain, that God would show him, that he sees perceptively the place from a distance, Merachok, this mountain where God intended for him to carry out the act and God to reveal himself in this revelatory occasion. Then we come to verse 5. Abraham then says to his 2 young men that have accompanied him, stay here, and then use of, similar to Lake Lakah, we have Shavu Lachem, talking to the 2 young men, stay here, you guys by yourselves, Ho here, with the donkey. So again, the donkey's been packed up with all that's needed in the preparation for this journey. Again, they've had food supply, no doubt, packed on the donkey, and other necessary materials for the journey, now in its 3rd day. But he tells the 2 young men to stay there for a time while I and the Na'ar, namely Isaac, and we will go unto thusly, again, to this, the place that he sees from a distance. So there, seemingly, we might say at the base of this mount, hillside, where God would make. And what does he say? The nishtakave, the neshuva alekim. Very revealing. God's testing him, and he said, we will go. We will, and we talked about this word earlier in the semester, a couple of weeks back, the use of chava, and this is again that hishtafel form, now in the imperfect, first plural, we will go, namely Abraham with Isaac, and we will worship God, and we will return to you. So in one aspect of Abram's faith, somehow God will intervene. God, he is seeing perceptively, God is going to do something in the situation such that, yes, we'll go, I will carry out God's instruction, but somehow we will worship, and again, following God faithfully. Remember how we talked about the use of chava in the hishtafel form, carrying out God's instruction as given in the request made to Abraham in this journey, but also that we will come back. We together. So the use of the first person plural, we, and then also the plural in the suffix to the preposition el, We will come back to you guys. So we will return to you. So, Abraham, of course, we're not told in detail. What does Abraham understand other than somehow God's promise in and through Isaac is going to be fulfilled? Not sure how God's going to do it, but I'm willing to follow God's instruction and do what he has required of me. Be willing to humbly submit myself to the divine instruction. That's the ultimate meaning of fearing God, is to be in submission to his will, be willing to follow his instruction, even though sometimes it may not make sense from a human standpoint. It may not be simple. It may demand more of us than we think we can endure. But God's promises of his faithfulness throughout the narrative are revealed in this, and Abraham's fully trusting of God is evidenced here in his response that we will worship God and we will return together where he has left these young men.